Wall Street digesting President-elect Trump's win earlier this week and considering what it could mean for taxes, regulation, and more. Joining us right now to talk about all of that, Jay Clayton, former SEC Chairman under President Trump. He's now independent chair at Apollo and a CNBC contributor. Good morning to you.
Morning.
I think we're all trying to make sense of where all of this goes next and sort of the various permutations it would take. You saw a great debate happening between Vivek and Anthony Scaramucci on the immigration front. I want to go to the tax front and try to understand where you think that moves beyond, if you believe it moves to creating a permanent state around our current tax structure, but whether you think things like tips and a lot of the things that were promised during the campaign, whether you think that actually happens, especially because I do think there's some anxiety in the bond market about just what our debt and deficits are going to look like, and so how that all works itself out.
Well, sure, and we all know taxes are on the table because the current tax program expires, so we're going to have to deal with that, particularly for earned income. Right. But let me take a step back a little bit on this. Tax policy is part of economic policy, and I think something that we should recognize that's going on here is a shift in the type of personnel that are going to come into government. That debate that I saw, which was a very good debate, you have to remember that virtually everyone that was appointed by the Biden-Harris administration had no business experience, had no understanding practically of how the economy actually works. So when we look at the tax code and the adjustments that are going to be made to the tax code, I do hope that there is a lot of input from the business community, as well as the political community. What is the most effective rate for getting revenue? Those are the things that we should be looking at.
Those are real questions.
Those are the real questions.
And so therefore, the question is, you heard a lot of promises during the campaign. There's some talk about peeling some of those things back because maybe if you get some business people in, they're going to say, well, that one's a good one, but actually that is going to create a problem.
And look, I think let's start with an easy one, which is the tax on corporation tax.
Right.
I don't think you can find anyone who thinks that raising that tax is going to increase revenue meaningfully. In fact, I'm in the camp that any raise may be, hurt revenue.
So we talked to Steve Mnuchin yesterday, and he said, look, he'd love to go down to that 15% number that he wished he could have gotten down to the first time around. Does that make sense? And then the question is, how do you will that drive more revenue ultimately in all sorts of other ways to make up for whatever
I think a good case can be made that the 15% number would increase revenue across receipts. But whether it's 15 or 20, what I know it shouldn't be is 28 or 30. Right. Because it really hurts U.S. competitiveness. And it really hurts.
I don't think that's on the table at all, do you?
That was on the table. It was on the table, and you know what? The American people spoke.
Said no.
They said
that's what I'm saying.
This is silly.
That's what I'm saying. But I think that's not on the table anymore, right? Yeah. One of the questions I was going to ask you was a personnel question. I think there's questions about the role that RFK might have in this new administration. Does he go through a confirmation process? Is he an outside advisor? There's lots of questions about the Elon Musks of the world, who I think would be part of this efficiency group, if not run it. Is there going to be a realignment of how business people are involved or not involved in this administration and the various conflicts of interest and other things that people are going to invariably raise flags about?
Sure. That is going to come up. And look, we need to have people who understand our markets in the positions of regulating our markets. The idea that you can have somebody who has had an academic-only career come in and be an effective regulator is fanciful. Now, should we have academics in the mix? Of course we should.
Right.
But we need to have people like that. And two things on this. Our ethics rules are very important, but they shouldn't be preclusive of people who have experience. They have been used to preclude people who have experience.
Right.
We need to take a pause on that.
And so what does that mean, though? Because people are going to say, like, there's a chance that, the president could waive a conflicts issue, for example, for Elon Musk. And it may be great in many ways for Elon Musk to be part of the administration and do many of the things that we've talked about doing. But at the same time, if there are questions in the public sphere about whether he's going to also be a beneficiary economically himself as a result of those things, that also, therefore, undermines, again, this goes to the trust in democracy issue, which actually I think is a big, not just trust in democracy, but a trust in the system By the way, I believe that one of the reasons that the next president of the United States is winning and won the election is because there's a large group of people in this country who don't believe that they could trust the system on the other side.
I think
everybody together?
I think Tuesday night showed that people want Elon Musk's voice in policy discussions. They voted in favor.
I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be. I'm just saying, how do you do it?
But let me make a point. And the ethics rules, transparency and the like, we should have them, but they should not preclude us from having a person like Elon Musk who has demonstrated incredible competence, including across media and transparency in the mix.
When Barry was here, they were talking about, I'm sure Elon, when Kamala wins, I'm sure Elon would want to work for her, too, as an American. And I finally said, when we went off, I said, Barry, you don't need to have to beg Elon to work for Kamala. You could just vote for Trump and get Elon along with it. He's already on that team. You don't have to have this. And I said, actually, I remember I said, you don't have to twist yourself in a pretzel to get where Elon can. But it was weird because they were. I think the other side was jealous that Elon threw his lot in, obviously, with Trump. And I think it had a lot to do with Trump winning.
Sure, but that's a political issue. I'm talking about the credibility of the quote-unquote system and trying to have the country feel really good about all aspects of it. And here's where I'll go with it. We've had lots of conversations, and I've been, I hope, outspoken about the fact that, you look at various congresspeople and senators. We've talked about Pelosi and others where they're trading stocks, for example, at the same time that they're engaged or involved in these things. And some of them will say that, they're in blind trusts or they had nothing to do with it or this or that and all sorts of things. But invariably the country, people in the country, conspiratorial or not, say, I don't believe in this system. I think this is crazy to have people allowed to do that at the same time because it undermines the trust in the system. And if part of what we're all trying to do is bring back the trust, my question is how can we have, and I think there's ways to do it, somebody who's as great as Elon may be at helping the government figure out some of these things, but also do it in a way where parts of the country are not saying that other people are enriching themselves.
Everything you're saying is right. This is a challenge that we should take on and face head on. We should say, if Elon Musk wants to spend, 20% of his bandwidth making the country better, we should figure out how to do it.